Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree is part of the Public Square Media network of podcasts that seek to bring an LDS perspective into the public square. I'm Carl Cranny here with my co-host Liz Busby to do another short episode. Liz, what are we talking about today?
This short, we're going to be covering a Pixar SparkShort called Self. If you haven't watched any of these SparkShorts, they tend to be more artistic or risky short films from Pixar animation. Often they don't have any spoken dialogue. This particular short tells the story of a wooden doll who finds herself in a world of perfect metallic dolls and struggles to fit in. It's really beautifully made using stop-motion animation and was just released in February.
Yeah, I saw this show up and just the title Self, I thought, this is going to be interesting. And I watched it and thought, we need to do a podcast about this. It's only 7 minutes long. If you haven't watched it yet, seriously, pause the podcast, go watch it, and we'll see you back here in 8 minutes as you switch between apps on your phone or whatever. It's a wonderful piece in that I think there's a lot that can be learned from it, and it's good discussions to be had from the various things as this wooden doll arrives in the land of the metallic dolls, and they're all gorgeous and wonderful, and they have little sing-song dings as they tap on each other to communicate and stuff, and she feels very self-conscious, and eventually makes a wish, basically, that says, hey, I'd like to be like these other metal dolls, and her wish is granted, and she slowly starts replacing pieces of her body, and then ends up, in the end, deciding to go back to her wooden self after she is transitioned mostly to being like these other dolls. And of course, at that point, they accept her and everybody's happy and the credits roll. But I don't know. What do we make of the premise of this? Even just the title, Self. Liz, what were your impressions about the whole thing?
At first, it makes sense when she's replacing her hand. But when I was watching this with my husband and she replaces her body, he was like, wait a minute. How did she do that? How does that work? Fantasy world building aside. Yeah, it does seem to ask the question, what is our self? And it's interesting that it ends up identifying ourself has to do with our body as well as whatever our identity is outside of that, which is interesting.
Right. There's no dialogue, so there's nothing in it about ideas or political persuasions or religion, personality, any of that. It's just it's completely absent, and it's just purely what do you look like? I guess maybe what you sound, but in a non-dialogue sort of way.
Yeah, she's got like a rattly wooden sound, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I dig it. She's a gorgeous doll, but she's just not gorgeous metallic doll like all the others. And like when she shows up, they're all just rude to her, and she's there, and she's trying to make friends and wave hi, and everybody just completely ignores her until she falls down and breaks her wrist for the first time. And that's when she starts to really think, maybe I don't belong here. And, wishes upon a star, very Disney sort of moment. And then metallic body parts start dropping from the sky so that she can go find them and replace parts of her body.
Yeah, that part is really weird because when you think about it, you're like, who is granting this? The metaphysics of it are very strange. She's wished on a star and then something is dropping metal body parts from the sky. As I was watching this, I realized it felt like a secular version of Max Lucado's books, like the You Are Special books that have the little wooden puppets called Wemmix and the Woodcarver. It's implied that she came from somewhere. She comes up on this escalator and arrives in this world, and she makes a wish on a star, and somebody is sending her parts. But we're going to totally ignore who is doing this to her or who put her here. All those questions are not important.
Right. Where did she come from? Why is she here? Where is she going? We don't care about those questions.
No. Yeah. We just want to know if we're accepted by other people.
And it's only a 7-minute short, so we shouldn't maybe get too deep into it. But at the same time, it opens itself up to these kinds of questions. Where did she come from? Why is the escalator going up? Because it seems to me like the opening scene was like arriving in heaven. Like you're coming out of the darkness and going into this bright place where all these beautiful, gorgeous people, everything's shiny. That's what it felt like to me as she gets up there. But then everybody is just rude and ignores her. And I think it's obvious that she wants to be accepted by them. I wonder how the short might have been different if she had shown up and they had shaken her hand and said hello. If like the scene at the end where they start trying to communicate and talk with her as she's rapping on her wooden head and creating the little wooden sounds, and they start dinging on their heads and create their very melodic sounds. If they had done that at the beginning, would she have felt accepted? Would she still have wished on the star? Would she have wanted to be like them because they're so nice and generous and, oh, here's this new person, let's help you get acquainted, let's help you find an apartment. Why are you here in our city, miss? Are you a refugee? Great. I don't know. If they had been nice at the beginning or even noticed her at all, I'd be very curious to see how that would read. The same sort of sequence of events had then come about.
Yeah, and similarly, the one thing that really bothered me about it was that they are all identical pretty much. There's a little bit of hair variation and there are two sexes going on, but they look so similar. And those two premises that they totally ignore her and that they are all identical and all perfect make it problematic to read this as a metaphor for fitting in society, because if you believe that everyone besides you is perfect, you probably have some mental health issues you need to work on, because there is literally no chance that is the case. Everybody has problems. And so you need to learn to see other people more realistically so you don't feel so judged by them.
It's that ex-KCD comic where they're all sitting on the subway and everybody has the same thought bubble, which is, I'm the only one here who's really self-aware. All these other sheeple are just going about their day, not really realizing what kind of system they're trapped in.
Yeah, it is a very focused inward on yourself kind of thing.
Right? Yeah, that's why when I saw the title, I was like, oh, 7 minutes? Yeah, this is going to be worth it to see what they think self is. And so I kind of want to turn the whole thing on its head a little bit. The obvious thesis is if you are just yourself, that is all you need to do. People love and accept you, and people should and will, the good people will love and accept you for who you are. It's very expressive individualism. Be your authentic self, and then everything will work out fine. And that is the ultimate goal of, I don't know, everything. If you are yourself, that trounces all ethical considerations or, I don't know, anything else, and you'll be happy. That's the obvious thesis of this. But rewatching it, I thought, what if we flip that on its head? What if she is supposed to become like the other dolls? What if that's the ultimate goal here? And then what we have is this very heartbreaking story of somebody who begins to, and I'm going to start using religious terminology here, who begins to start putting off her natural man, taking whatever imperfections that she has, vices, sins, whatever. And again, this is all done through the metaphor and imagery of a body. Maybe don't read too much into this on that front. But she's making good strides to become better, to replace the things that she needs to, that are broken. Literally, in the case of the first thing, you could walk around with just a broken hand, but maybe you should get that fixed. I don't know. If we think of that as what is desirable, then what we have here is a heartbreaking story of somebody who begins to make progress and then backslides. And if we're going to read this more for ethical or religious lens, begins to, the phrase in the scriptures is, return as a dog to their vomit, which is pretty evocative to me. And then the ending is heart-wrenching. This is not how it should have been. You had this chance, and then you didn't go through with it. It reminds me a little bit of the C.S. Lewis quote about, and I'll just read it right here. Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps, you can understand what he's doing. He's getting the drains right, stopping the leaks in the roof, and so on. You know those jobs needed doing, and so you're not surprised, but presently he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably, and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come live in it himself. If we think that, and apply that sort of logic to this wooden doll replacing herself slowly and becoming better and better, that is also an interesting symbolism. I don't think it's what they intended, but if we look at it that way, I think that can teach us interesting things about what is really important and how the authentic self could become a barrier to becoming your true self, which is a child of God, and eventually returning to live with him. If we believe this is heaven and she has now decided to retrogress, then it just completely changes the tone of the short.
Yeah, it is interesting. And it brings up the question of, is it even possible to make a film about self-acceptance that isn't thoroughly expressive individualism, right? Like, is it possible to accept yourself and also accept that you need to improve at the same time? Are those contradictions in terms?
That can't be the case. That you could only make a movie that is either you are perfect the way you are, need to make no changes whatsoever, or like pure Calvinism, where you are utterly depraved, right? The T from tulip, for those of you who are familiar with the 5-point Calvinism, that you are worthless and useless, and there has to be a middle ground, and this movie doesn't strike it.
And I think part of the problem is that all those other people are portrayed as identical, which is super how I don't think heaven is. I definitely subscribe to the C.S. Lewis vision of heaven in The Great Divorce, where as you become more like God, you also become more and more like yourself, the real version of yourself. But it means that you have to leave things behind that you thought were yourself and which turn out not to be yourself.
Reading The Great Divorce for the first time a couple of months ago, for me actually, I really do like that thought. And also, the more real you become, the more you approach God, the more real you are, the more substantial you are.
You could almost tie that into this. Like, maybe that's why they aren't seeing her at the beginning. Oh, if you read this way.
Oh, yeah.
You could say the reason they're being so rude is like they barely notice she's there because she hasn't yet adjusted to this place where she is.
Right. Oh, I like that. And then at the end, they do notice her because she's like 90% gold at that point. There's just a little bit of the back of her head, and her hair is still, it's in its original form. But then she replaces her face with the cracked face that she has now damaged irreparably and put it on. And they're still like, oh, you're fine. That's good. And I'm like, your face is cracked. Go see a doctor.
Was her wrist broken at the end when she puts herself back together?
I don't remember. Probably not. I think I would have noticed that, actually.
It's fine if your face is cracked, but like a non-useful hand seems to be more of a problem. So we're going to ignore that.
Yeah. Now I want to go back and just look at that and see if that detail is there. Because I think she's like tapping on her head with her hand, and it's fine.
So some damage is okay, but other damage not okay.
Maybe. Yeah. Or it could just be an oversight on the Pixar animators' show.
Could just be that it's a 7-minute short.
Yeah. But a thought-provoking one, nonetheless.
Yes.
Do you want to just move into our reading segment then?
Yes, lightning round.
All right. Content, clean versus objectionable material, celestial, terrestrial, telestial, outer darkness. Just on the objectionable material, celestial. There's nothing here really wrong.
Nope. You might get a little wince out of really young kids with the wrist breaking, and it's a little bit disturbing watching her take off her arm or her leg to replace it, but not really.
Certainly not as bad as Sid in the first Toy Story.
For sure.
Yeah, so yeah, celestial, nothing objectionable here, except for maybe message, but we'll get to that in a minute. Artistic merit, 1 to 5 popcorn balls. You go first. What do you think?
For one of these Pixar shorts, it feels pretty safe to me. I didn't realize that it was stop motion animation, actually, when I first watched it. It didn't feel very stop motion-y to me. It just felt fine and normal. It's not one of the best Pixar shorts I've watched. I'm going to give it like 3.
I think I'm going to give it 4. Yeah, Pixar does good work, and it's a short. Maybe we've already spent more time analyzing it than it itself is.
That's what we do.
I'd give it 4 popcorn balls. I liked it. And gospel connections, morally edifying messages. I think I'm going to have to give this one a 2. Because I watched it at one point with my 7-year-old daughter, and I said, what do you think the message of this is? She said, just be yourself. And I was like, okay. But then we started talking a little bit about that, and that is such a large part of our culture. It was really hard for me to get her to even think that might be a problematic way of viewing the world. So I'm going to give it 2 Apricot. Expressive individualism, in its pure form is not compatible with the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, and neither is the thesis of this short.
I agree with you. I think 2 is good. For it being something that you can use to discuss this with a kid, it's very useful, and to think about it in your own way. But yeah, not exactly a revolutionary message in our culture, as you pointed out. Like, this is another one of those, let's preach against the dangers of fire when there are floods going on. It's not exactly like the message that we are lacking in our world. So not super revolutionary for me.
Sure. I think if you flipped it the way I did as a thought experiment and think that if this is the desirable outcome to become like these people whose land you have just arrived in, then I'd give it 5 apricots. But
it's definitely reading against what is intended.
Yeah, 100%. There you have it. All right. This has been a Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree short. We encourage you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy, and we will see you next time.